This gospel song is inspired by Jesus's parable, which is Matthew 25, 1 through 13. And when there are 10 bridesmaids and they're waiting for the bridegroom to come to them so that the wedding night procession can start. Having not prepared an adequate supply of oil, 5 of the women foolishly allow their lamps to burn out, while the other 5, ready with oil refills, keeps theirs lit. The parable is a warning to be prepared for the bridegroom's return, always kindling our faith and shining forth our good works. The song is thus a plea that God would help us persevere. Andrew Wyeth's realistic painting centers around the narratives of rural life in Pennsylvania, where he lived for most of each year, and Maine, where he and his wife spent their summers. This particular painting, shows his friend, Alvaro Olson, sitting in a room of his, 18th century, that's Alvaro's farmhouse in Cushing, Maine. Weary and worn, he stares off to the side, his face cast in a dim glow of an oil lamp. Alvaro tended to the family farm, and he took care of his increasingly sister who had polio. Well, it was a form of polio. No, not polio. It was a form of a degenerative disease. And she's also the subject of Andrew Wyeth's most historic and famous painting. And I wanted to start with this because we do come from the cathedral. We are a body of believers. And this picture just resonated with me. Here is a weary, worn farmer, cares of the world, but yet Wyeth painted him with this oil lamp that he knows he has to get up and he has to persevere. And any of you that come from a family of farmers, I'm sure that you have seen this look on a grandfather's face or a dad's face at the end of the day when taking care of all of the animals, and all of the other things that have to be done every single day on a farm, which Andrew has just captured beautifully in this particular pose. Andrew Wyeth was one of America's best-known realistic painters. And his canvases were imbued with mysteriousness, as you can see looking at this particular picture of apples in the windowsill. He rendered scenes of his everyday life in rural Pennsylvania and Maine, primarily in watercolor and tempera. And while he was famous for this realistic descriptions, his compositions often carry a sense of kind of the uncanny, and which some critics, not everybody, loved Andrew Wyeth's paintings. A lot of critics did not. And they referred to him as magic realist. While much beloved by a popular audience, like I said, and for a time, the critical establishment, when he was at his height, really acclaimed his work. Wyeth's reputation declined in the 1960s, as some felt his paintings just didn't keep up with the times and were not relevant to contemporary culture. And this was the time when there was lots of upheaval going in the 60s, and they just didn't feel like that his work was relevant. Wyeth refused to change, though, his style, and he continued painting the rural life he had always known. And later he became literally an American legend and a touchstone for young painters who have returned to realism, to prose, all of the various issues that are confronting us in this day and age. And you're even going to see it if you go to the quilting thing, you'll even see it in quilters. He was one of the most popular painters in the United States as ever produced. His composition, his use of colors are designed to create a particular mood. And I think as we look at his paintings, that's something to kind of put in the back of your mind as you're looking at these paintings. He uses elements, and then he used amidst others. His favorite media was watercolor and egg tempera, which we'll talk about in a minute. He was caught up in the artwork of the 1930s, which was your Jackson Pollock era in Koenig, which was, if you can focus in your mind and remember Jackson Pollock's famous painting of Autumn Spring with all the lines and everything moving around. That was the era that he was painting in, or when he was coming of age in. But he wasn't caught up in that art. Or the social comment. His art personalized an expression of the people, the landscapes, the objects, which had meaning to him. Such diverse things like a bucket of blueberries, old soldiers, a coat that was hanging on the wall, walking boots, interesting people. They've all appeared in his paintings. He liked to paint the landscape in winter and early spring when the colors were real subtle and the trees bare. The colors just suited his temper palette, which was low-keyed and subdued. And in many paintings, the space around the objects or the people became just as a real important component of his composition. Wyeth really, and I think this as you're listening to me and you're reading this quote from him, he did not want people to look at his painting just to see how well he painted the fine details, the fine composition of an apple, how good he was at it, like a still life composition. That's just not what he was after. He preferred that through his paintings, and I think this is really important to remember, people could be reminded of memories. And all of the documentaries that I have listened to when Andrew Wyeth speaks, he talks about that. He talks the importance of memories of their own past, or they're experiencing new feelings in the present. It was not shallow like the critics say, I don't think, and a shallow nostalgia, but it was a depth of emotion as well. And now, if you got a piece of paper and a pencil, jot these down. These are the elements of design, and this is what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to give you a Art 101, simple, fifth grade look at what I would teach my fifth graders, the elements of design. And what this will do is, as you look at a piece of artwork, it will help you visually describe it in your mind. And sometimes if you can visually describe art in your mind or with another human being, as we're going to be, then doors start opening up. So the elements of design, these are the basic ones, are line, horizontal, vertical, diagonal, straight, all the different kinds of lines. Can you see my little cursor, everybody? Thumbs up if you can. Okay, good. Shape, either two-dimensional, probably, or geometric, a square, a circle, an oval. Organic, there can be organic shapes. Form, what is form? It can be a cube, geometric, a cube, a sphere, a cone. It can be organic, like people, animals, tables. Those can be forms. Color, refers to wavelengths of light, and hues and values such as lightness and darkness, and intensity, like the saturation or the amount of pigment that is used, or a temperature, warm and cold, cool. And it also can relate color to tint, tone, and shade. And at our next art salon that we're going to be talking about symbols, I've got a whole array of interesting symbols that are used in pictures that use colors as symbols, because colors have value as a symbol as well. Value, lightness or darkness of an image are part of an image. And as you can see that the leaf here all the way down kind of gives you an idea of the definition of these elements. Texture, feel, appearance, thickness, a stickiness of a surface, furry, and then of course, the last one that we'll discuss is space. and this is the area around or between the images. And and also positive and negative space. All right, that's a lot of information. Now let's take that information and let's take it to one of what the most famous painting, probably one of the most famous paintings, I believe, in the world. And it happens to be called Christina's World. So let's take these elements and look at them as we look at this painting. First of all, whenever I look at a painting, the first time that I walk into a museum or an art gallery anyway, I want to do what I call a visual analysis. Just visually, just stop. I don't look at anything else but what's in that painting. Okay, let's look at what's in that painting. Let's just do a little analysis of it. Okay, there's a vast open field. There's a weathered, and as I do, okay, I'll kind of move around. There's this vast open field. There's a weathered wooden farmhouse in the distant landscape. It's empty, it's lifeless in this vast space. The only sign of life right here is this figure of Christina with her back facing us, and she's looking at the farmhouse from her position, and she's lower. You know, she's in her entire body is portrayed, all bit of it, on the grass, and she's supporting her body with her upper arm, and her arms are scrawny. She's not pudgy at all. Her left arm appears to be outstretched before her. Her fingers are splayed. Notice that. Her fingers are splayed on the ground. Her right arm is positioned behind her. And she's also being painted as the only color in this kind of light pink dress. She's got a bun at the back of her hair. Her hair is pulled back in a bun. But there's like hair moving down the sides that perhaps the wind is blowing. The farmhouse is gray, structured, and this is a blue sky. Even in this picture, it does. I mean, I think the original painting, it is blue. So keep in mind as I talk about the sky that it is blue, and it's a light blue. It's not a heavy blue, but a light blue. Mm-hmm. Now notice the placement as visually we're looking, the placement of everything. The farmhouse is in the right-hand corner with a fenced off area. It looks like there's a fence there, I'm thinking. Fenced off area, possibly a garden, I would imagine, of some sorts. There's another wooden structure, perhaps a chicken coop, maybe. To the left of the house, there's a barn that is, and there's two curvy lines, if you can see them, coming right up here. Two curvy lines that is like a driveway. And almost 2/3 of this picture, think of this, 2/3 of this picture is made up of grass that appears, this grass appears up here that it's perhaps cut and mowed and shorter than the grass that is painted here. And around the house and barn, there's a big distinction, looking like it's been mowed, between the two grasses, the long grass. All right, now we've taken a visual analysis. We've looked at everything that and there's lots of other things that we could probably come up with. Now let's go to the next element, another element. Let's look at color in this. Take a look at color. The colors are muted. They're soft, the soft hues of grass. The only color that stands out from this rural landscape is her dress, as if she's the only flower in a sun-beaten, weathered field. And the grass, I've heard the grass described as tawny. Perhaps color is symbolizing something. Perhaps as we look at this color is symbolizing something of maybe her fighting spirit, since the empty landscape is not quite empty. And Christina herself, despite the condition that it looks like she is in, is still full of life. It's not a dead color. Another important aspect of this color palette is the sky, as I'd mentioned, and perhaps using that blue sky, because color does have symbolic meaning, it was perhaps a meaning of hope as she's reaching the farmhouse with not another soul in sight. It was a delicate blue. It's not an extreme blue, so that just doesn't overpower the emptiness of that landscape. The pink of her dress complements her skin. Look at the color there. I mean, it doesn't overwhelm it in any way, but it just kind of complements it. And the simplicity of it kind of creates a sympathy of a sort within our eyes. The shadows, notice this, the shadows of her arm. He's even gotten that in the shadows, and the shadows here of her arm and this was painted. And if you see it in MoMA in New York, it's painted with precise, and I mean precise, a way of, every single curve. You can see that it's very precise. Her arms, the way they're positioned, the color of her dress, it just reminds us of the solitary. The use of the color in this is just, it just makes her even more solitary. Now let's look at the texture. All right, first of all, let's look at the texture, like the slivers of grass. Took Wyeth 2 months to do the grass before he put her in, according to my research. 2 months just spending on the grass, okay? The texture, the wood of the house, Christina's dress is soft, feeling the blurred textures in the distance. Now look at the lines. Look at all the lines in this, and boy, this is a great example. He established a distant appearance by using a horizontal line. Here it is, guys, right up here. And that line establishes the depth. He created depth with the grass and the lines of the grass. Diagonal lines are created around the driveway. Okay. Vertical lines in the garden. And all of these lines, he just didn't say, oh, gee whiz, come up and paint a picture. He's an artist. And he's using the lines to convey the feeling that he wants to get across to you, the viewer, and to himself as the artist as well. And notice where her body's placed too. If you can close your mind just for a few minutes, look at the picture and then close your mind and place her up on the hill. Would that have had the same meaning? Where he's placed her body is absolutely the lines. He placed it diagonally so that it established her intent on movement. So by using that and by using the lines, he's also created movement using the lines in this painting. Shape and form. There's geometric and angular shapes from the house and the barn. They're notably square and rectangular and triangular shapes. Look at the shapes, okay? And one can spot a square shape created by the fenced-off area in front of the house, that little squared shape. And there are organic forms, oh my gosh, everywhere, that are evident in her figure. And then there's the rigidity, just the real rigidity of the distant structures, coupled with all of these dull colors that just make this scene a nostalgic, realistic scene of America. Christina's world then becomes, after looking and seeing how he used all of these elements, it becomes a psychological portrait of Christina's state of mind, as well as nostalgic looking for rural America. So I wanted us to go through that so that we can proceed to this. So now let's talk just a little bit about his style of artists and critics have called it magic realism. And magic realism is mystical, but it uses real forms to talk about that magic realism. It's just not a fantastic. This is a real person in a mystical situation. This is where he did his work. And I have to, before we get into the painting, and those of you that are going to go with us to do our Philadelphia tour, we just got the confirmation today about our tour on the Tuesday afternoon of not only Andrew Wyeth's studio, but also N.C. Wyeth's, his father's studio. Well, listening and reading about this studio is just wonderful. He, as his son Jamie said, he was really a messy painter. He would draw things, usually sketch things out, then he would put them perhaps into watercolor. He would, if you didn't like somebody, just simply throw it on the floor. And Jamie said you'd walk in and there was all along the floor, there was all of the pieces of his work on the floor, and anything that he was using for props that he might have brought in were scattered on the windowsill. And of course, there might be a dog hanging around or two. And as he worked on his composition, his artwork, and Jamie said there'd even be footprints all over the papers and everything that were on the wall. And this is, and then it would suddenly, he would just kind of clean, as he would get toward the end of the work, he would start kind of cleaning things up so that he could put that composition out in its entirety. This is my picture. This is one of the pictures that I took when I was there, and I loved it. You know, do not disturb. I do not sign autographs. And he was so popular that people did track him down and try to interfere with the work of art. The turn, we're going to look a little bit now at just the composition. What did he use to make these beautiful paintings? Okay, he paid attention. He paid attention to detail. Several interviews that I watched of Andrew Wyeth, he talks about something that I think is so critical now in this day and age, and what he absolutely championed. He talked about eyes. He talked about being in the moment. He talked about visual looking at everything. And he did. He was detailed oriented. Even though this is a wash and it probably doesn't look like it, he knew every single detail, probably crystal of the snow that he painted. And he expressed that over and over again. And when we talk about his dad and his background, you're going to see how he was led to do this. Anyway, his subjects seem a little uncanny or strange. He doesn't traffic in fantastical, like we said, subjects, but instead he reveals the material world to be permeated with kind of mystery and there's this picture here. There's a little mystery surrounding this. There's a little uncertainty. The house isn't in the middle of the screen. There's you've got this beautiful wash of color going over it. His preferred medium was watercolor and egg tempera, which was used in the Middle Ages, and we'll talk about that in just a second. This was, as I said, every single one in this painting, every single blade of grass was done individually. Every single blade. It's just amazing how it was. This is his dry brush watercolor, which he also did. He liked dryness. He liked the flatness and the way it forced him to tighten. And so he used egg tempera paint for most of his famous paintings. And this is what he would do. This is how he would do it himself. Before each painting session, he would prepare his paints using a raw egg yolk, vinegar, water, and pure powdered vegetable or mineral pigments. Then after creating an underpainting of these blocks of color, he'd apply this layer of egg tempera. And these layers acted like a a translucent glaze, and then it would combine all of these particular colors. And they also provided a depth of color that was almost impossible to achieve with acrylic or oil paints. Now his dad used acrylic and oil paints, and you'll see the difference. And his father was always saying, Andrew, you need to put more color in your paintings, but he liked that dryness, he liked that flatness, he liked the way it forced him to tighten up his technique. And his most detailed and his controlled paintings were done in this egg tempera on panels. It was first coated with a gesso. And then he used mineral pigments from all over the world. He would get these mineral pigments from everywhere. And he liked using the natural ones. He used low key colors. Some of his paintings are almost like black and white photographs, that intensity. And before painting, he always did a watercolor. And the broad areas went on first with the objects and the details, and then the egg tempera was added with a very tough surface. This had to dry for months before, and it can even be scrubbed. It was a technique that was so time consuming and intense that Wyeth, with this things that only completed about 2 of these a year. The next technique he used is with a dry brush technique. And look at this. This picture was done with dry brush. He'd apply very small, damp paint to a brush using no water medium to dilute the paint. He then painstakingly create minute details in his paintings with the very tip of his brush, the very tip. And the details that he painted this way looked as though they were drawn like this one and not painted. He painted in a highly realistic style that I've said over and over again has been referred to as magic realism. Look at this particular painting, because it's almost in like a dreamlike quality. He was able to achieve this appearance by arranging his composition and composing the elements of art. We have line here, my friends. We have color, we have texture, we have form, we have shape, okay? We have all of the elements of art that we just painstakingly went through with Christina's World is located in this picture. For example, he'd plant every blade of grass as it appears in real life. However, the same grass could also evoke a feeling of unease because of the artist's contrast interplay between direct light and shadow, as is in this one. Mystery, uncertainty. I'm going to give you a minute to read that. This is what he was after. This is what I was talking about when he talks about memory and looking and using your eyes and seeing the details. And once you really stop and look and visually look at a rock, whether it's a shell or whether, when he was talking one time, when we'll see it in this beautiful painting he did, he went up to the top where in the Olson house where he painted, and it was a bare room, had a curtain that was just almost destroyed. He opened the window, and as he opened the window, the wind came in and blew the curtain into the room. And that was a moment. And he went back again and again to get that moment to paint. Despite living in a very rural and secluded life in Pennsylvania and Maine, he kept tabs on the contemporary world. And we're going to discuss this. And while some of the critics dismissed his work as a sentimental depiction of rural life, many of Wyeth's paintings, though, could be considered quite radical in their exploration of the innate sexuality of his subjects, including the young Siri Erickson, the older Tesdorf, Helga, we heard of Tesdorf, and even his young neighbor, Eric Standard, all of whom he painted unabashedly nude. And up until his last year, he was still painting nudes. Let's talk about his dad. Now let's talk a little bit about the history of the family. Just because you cannot talk about Andrew Wyeth without talking about this family, this amazing family of painters that he came from. And it all originated with good old NC Newell Hornverse Wyeth. He was a well-known illustrator. His best remembered pictures are found in the series of childhood books published by Charles Scribner and Sons. He loved fantasy. His studio was filled with costumes and props and all kinds of things. And he had 5 children, and they were all partly educated at home. And he believed he was free, I don't know, he wasn't really a hippie, but he was too rich to be a hippie. But and I'm looking at the hippies, but he was a free spirit, and he believed that children should just be free and explore and not be confined in a schoolroom, that they should be able to get out and explore the world and have all kinds of activities to encourage and make their minds flow. To give you an example of that, the holidays in his studios were especially exciting. The painting studio was decorated with pumpkins, Indian corn, lanterns, candles, and they had Halloween parties. And this carried on after his death. I'll show you some pictures of the Wyeth family gathering at Halloween. The Wyeths really celebrated Halloween. But I love this story. At Christmas, and he was a big man. At Christmas, he would dress up as Santa Claus, and he would go up on their rooftop jangling, and the children would be in the bed, and they could hear these sounds up on the rooftop and jingling bells. And then he would climb down to distribute his presents. He was totally involved in whatever they did, wherever they lived. He wanted them to see colors and shadows and textures, sounds and smells, and even the fury of a thunderstorm. This is an example of his work. And as you can see, it is bold, and it is, and these are illustrations. He was a very, very well-paid illustrator. He worked with Howard Pyle, who was, and in fact, that's the reason I think he went to Pennsylvania to be tutored or trained under Howard Pyle, who was another famous illustrator. But his characters, and when you go to Brandywine Museum, or when you go to anything that exhibits illustrators, his work, and it was bold work. I mean, he did huge canvases that were very colorful. Look at the lines and the shapes and the contours in these particular paintings. Now, our boy Wyeth was born July the 12th. He had 5 siblings. He was a very sickly baby. And in fact, the other children were able to go to school, but Wyeth's dad kept him at home, and he just had private tutors. But all 5 of these children were painters in their own right and exhibitors. I don't know if you're familiar with Peter Hurd, who painted that controversial picture of Lyndon Johnson years ago, but he was married, I believe, to Caroline Wyeth. And they continued, and they were all tutored, and even they became tutorers. They tutored, or mentors. Jamie Wyeth, we'll look at some paintings, is Andrew Wyeth's son, is a well-renowned artist in his own right. He does things a little differently, which I will share with you in a minute. As I said, he was concerned about Wyeth's fragile health, so that he was kept at home. And then in the summers, they were not staying at Chad's Ford. They started spending their summers in Maine, and where the children enjoyed more nature and relished the intellectual and social stimulation of their visiting guests. Exhibiting artistic promise at an early age, Andrew learned to draw before he could read. And eventually, he even assisted his father in creating illustrations. He said he was confined because of his frail constitution, and he studied and he read the poetry of Robert Frost, the writings of Thoreau, and he cultivated a deep, wonderful understanding of nature. And he enjoyed dressing up and building narratives from props and costumes. He became fascinated with death and the macabre in his youth. And he was enthusiastic about theater, Shakespeare, especially Shakespeare. He spent a lot of his time as a child building a theater that was equipped with costume dolls to stage Arthur Doyle's play, The White Company. Um, his formal training began, and his father could see his talent, and he started encouraging him to draw. This was his first drawing task. His first drawing task was to draw an old flintlock pirate pistol that his father had, and his father deliberately chose something they knew the boy would be interested in. Okay, and he drew it over and over, first in one position, then another, for 5 months. And he became intensely interested in the task. So his next project that his father gave him was drawings on cubes and spears. And then he painted in oil from still life on apples or draped cloth. And then he made copies of Beethoven's Death Mass, and then a large cutlass against drapery. His father taught him without pressure, helping him to make steady progress. And by the time Andrew was 18, some of his watercolors were taken to New York, art dealer, and sold, all of them in a gallery. He knew that he needed more experience, and his father was guiding him and helped him study anatomy, beginning with drawings of a skeleton. Then he hired local people to model for his drawings. NCY seemed to know what Andrew needed to move on to the next phase of his training, to really learn to get inside the object or the person they was painting. However, family tension, NCY was also quite overbearing with everybody. And McCullough, the famous historian David McCullough, has done did a great documentary for the Smithsonian. We're all on the Wyeth family, and if you get an opportunity to YouTube it, because it's excellent. It was years ago, and he describes, and the family describes, that he was overbearing. He directive, things were done his way, et cetera, et cetera. So when Andrew, on a vacation, goes to Maine, and he meets this cute little 18-year-old gal named Betsy, and falls madly in love with her. Andrew was 22, she was 18. NC was not happy with this at all, and he opposed it rigorously. However, Andrew went along with it, married her, and was so happy he did, because she was the one that really, as I said to you, NCY would say, Andrew, your colors, you need more colors. You need to put, there was one picture where Andrew has a painting of a man, just a man alone in a field, and it's that kind of dry and tawny look and color. And his father looks at it and he says, he needs a gun. He needs more color. He needs a dog in the picture. When Andrew showed it to Betsy, Betsy says, no, it doesn't. So the role shifted, and Betsy became his encourager. She took care of the children. She became his business partner. And even though there were still tensions with her and NCY, she was the one that was really, as a business partner, she took care of everything. Brandywine Museum and Brandywine Conservatory, which are phenomenal things in Chadds Ford, was her brainchild. She was the one that she talked to Koenig's wife, who was cataloging all of Koenig's artwork, which was something that artists, because they're artists, just didn't do. She encouraged Betsy to do the same thing, and Betsy took that on. Betsy was also, they bought 2 islands up in Maine. She transformed those islands into natural habitats. She was also involved in preservation activities. She was very active in her community. And she was a bit of an overbearing person. And she and Andrew were married for over 60 years. And he said that the marriage was built on sometimes on conflict. So I think heads betted along that way. The this is an example of what I was talking about. And Andrew was a bit of a voyeur, not a bit, he was one. His idea, I mean, three families, the Krugers on the farm. Um, he that he would slip in, they gave him a room upstairs, and he would just slip down and watch them at whatever they were doing. They never knew when he was coming. That was one family. The Olsons the same way. When he was up in Maine, he had a in their old house, their you know, upstairs, because Christina could not go up the stairs, so it was completely bare. He had a studio up there, and he would slip in and out. And then in the later years, there was a family in Chadds Ford that just allowed him to come in. And he, even when they were sleeping, and they'd wake up and there he'd be, and painting them. So he was quite an interesting person. But Halloween was one of the things they loved, and they separated. I do not know who this is with the pumpkin head on. That's probably another story. Christina Olson was one of his most frequent and subjects, and she was a neighbor in Cushing, Maine. She had a degenerative muscle disorder. She chose not to use a wheelchair, and she was often seen crawling on the ground from one place to the other. Wyeth greatly admired her ferocious independence and strength, and she became the inspiration for his most famous painting. And not only that, she became his best friend. They would have long conversations. She was a wonderful friend to him. In fact, when Wyeth died, Christina's nephew, because she'd passed away, Christina's nephew got an interesting phone call the next day after Wyeth died, and it was Betsy. And Betsy said, Andy wants to be buried, or wanted to be buried, in the Olson graveyard, may he? And he was. They granted, and that's where he's buried. He is buried in the Olson cemetery, which I think is quite interesting. And this one I wanted to share with you because I just love this. This is a painting that he painted on his, and it brings together all of the people that he painted. This the reason I'm showing it to you. First of all, I want you to look at this. Look at the lines, look at the forms, look at the shape. Let's just go over just real quickly. This is a Christmas tree. This is a hill. You see railroad tracks, and there's a reason for those railroad tracks. All of these people that are in this winter maypole are all subjects that Andrew Wyeth painted. Each one of them has a story. And at first glance, it's a Christmas tree, it's perched atop a pole. But these dancers are not children, but adults. Landscape is gray. The tan back here, this tan creates texture. The clean snow quiets the landscape. The snow is untouched. If you notice, look, there's no footprints, and that's important. There's no footprints. Okay. This depicts 6 of his frequent models rejoicing at his death, and he's not dead yet. But 6 of, and he said that Wyeth understood that he was difficult to work with. And speaking with the models who posed for them, he once said, when I worked, I raised hell with them mentally and emotionally. They wish I were dead so they wouldn't have to pose anymore. Snow Hill then, and this is the hill, takes its name from the moment in Moby Dick when the great white whale is finally sighted. A hump like a snow hill. It's Moby Dick. In the painting, it is an intimacy with the landscape, perhaps like Ahab's intimacy with the great white whale, a grief to conquer and befriend. Now, I'm bringing you more history in about Andrew Wyeth with this particular painting. And I want to share with you, when you look, and if you get a chance, pull it up tonight on your computers. And really, if you could get a good a good picture of it, it's fascinating. First of all, there are railroad tracks in the background. And this is the railroad tracks where Wyeth's father's car stalled on these tracks in 1945. And he and his 3-year-old grandson, N.C. Wyeth and his 3-year-old grandson, Andrew Wyeth's nephew, were struck and they were killed by that train. And the loss of his dad was absolutely devastated. Then other things, he painted the hill, and this is the hill that overlooked those railroad tracks. He said that the hill became the body of his father, and his father was always present. The hill was known as Kerner's Hill in rural Pennsylvania, and from it one could view all of the places where Wyeth and his friends lived. And I'm hoping that when we go, that we get to see this hill because it's just so monumental. The very same models featured in this painting, although their faces are from us and we can't see their faces, their identities are apparent by the clothing that they wear and they wore in previous works. And let me pull this, okay. That's a little bit, you can see this a little bit better. And these are all of the ones that Wyeth painted. And here they are. Here are the paintings of them. Most of the models featured in the painting were long dead themselves. Carl Kerner succumbed to cancer, Alan Lynch to suicide, Bill Loper to mental illness, and of course Wyeth's own father and nephew in the car accidents. Here Wyeth depicted these old friends as more joyous than he had ever painted them before. And here they were free of the torment that Wyeth had seen in them. Wyeth was looking back at all those who were important to his art, those who made him who he was. He stated that he too is in this picture, in the empty ribbon that is blowing in the wind. Now, Helga. We cannot leave this description without talking about Helga. Helga was the nurse of Kerner, the farmer that's family. And the Helga pictures are a series of quiet, thoughtful portraits of Helga Testorf, who is presented both clothed and nude in various locations, indoors and out. These rare paintings were created from 1971 to 1975 in almost complete secrecy. Both the artist and the model kept the extent of this creative union hidden from their respective spouses. And Wyeth kept most of the works hidden in the loft of a mill house on his property at Chadds Ford, rural Pennsylvania. Now, Helga's husband knew that he was painting her, and Wyeth had promised that he would never paint her in the nude. So when the sheer amount of these portraits, and there were a lot of them, and the level of the intimacy and the secrecy involved came to light, their spouses, the small town of Chadds Ford, and the country, the entire country was taken aback. In fact, it was all over the news for a week. And Newsweek and Time magazine had pictures of Helga on the front. Little was ever said by Helga Testorf or the Wyeths to shed light on the nature of this series. As rumors whirled about their love, affairs, and publicity stunts, the works spoke for themselves. And what remains is a visual examination of intimacy, vulnerability, unlike anything else in contemporary art. There is a wonderful interview of Helga. She did not give any interviews, and she discusses this, and I will send links if you're interested. I didn't know how much you were interested, but some of the documentaries on YouTube are just excellent. Now, very quickly before we have to leave, we've got to look at some of his works. And I'll just take a gander. This is Winter Fields. And let's use our elements to kind of describe this. This is, as you can see, it's a dead crow. Rigor mortis is set in. His face is pressed to the ground, not far from the creature. The fields surrounding neighbor's house are well into the distance. Notice the lines again. I'm going to notice the shapes. Notice how the texture, the silkiness, the texture, the lighting, just a gentle color in the background of just one little piece over here. But all of this is we are pulled into the screen. This is the blue-black of the feathers. He said this helped him break free if he ever wanted to do any impressionistic work. This was in 1942. This was painted during World War II. And it possibly from Wyeth's standpoint, because he had seen so many, he was fascinated as a boy by King, I think his name is King, who did the black and white silent pictures of World War II and World War I, and Wyeth had seen all of them, and he was fascinated by war and it's what it does. And he was also fascinated, as we said, by death and what death says to us. So Wyeth creates a depiction of space, and look at the space. Look how we use this space here. There's one of our elements that neither humans or a camera could capture. No one could capture that. This one. Remember I told you about the hill? We saw the hill in the, this is, see a young man running fast down a hill. It's a cold winter scene. And now this is the hill. Over the other side of the hill was the railroad track where Wyeth's dad was killed. And given the biographical context, one can now imagine Wyeth himself running aimlessly down this hill, trying to make sense of his father's death. Perspective, another one. This is an unusual composition painted. Notice where the horizon line is on this. Notice the shape and the flow and the texture. These are Howard Pyle's booths that Betsy Wyeth gave Andrew for a birthday present in 1950. The famous, she got them at an auction. Notice the detail of the lines. All of these are hand painted in there. And my favorite, but I have a copy of this. Okay. This is called Master Bedroom. And this is the dog Rattler, the family dog. And Wyeth's granddaughter said that Wyeth had just come in from a walk outside and he saw the dog. He went to take a nap and the dog was in the bed. And he said, you know, dogs, they're the damnedest things. They just take over the house. So Wyeth captured this mundane. Okay, somebody's microphone's. Catherine, somebody's mic's on. Okay, there we go. Wyeth captures this scene. The walls suggest old, discolored plaster. And Wyeth didn't think much of this picture at all. And he suggested that she put it on a giveaway pile, Betsy. But Betsy had enough sense to not. And now it's probably hanging in thousands of millions of bedrooms all over the world. And I'm not going to say anything about this one. I just want you to look for a minute at it as we come to a close. This is fishing nets. And think about what we talked about with the elements and how he used these elements to draw you into a picture. This is his son, Jamie. As you can see, he has a different take than Andrew did on life, but here is the famous pumpkin head, and you will see Jamie likes the macabre as well. During his lifetime and after poster and print productions of Wyeth's paintings could be found in countless homes and dorm rooms, his paintings sparked an emotional attraction to nostalgia. His realism influenced a number of regional artists from Maine and Pennsylvania and across the United States. But with the prominence of abstraction in the conceptual art, however, many of these painters have not had much of any national recognition. In the decade since his death, and he died in, there's more than a decade, he died in 2009, scholars have reevaluated Wyeth's realism and his relation to abstract and modernism and his status as an important author has only grown. He inspired a new generation of artists and filmmakers alike. His youngest son, Jamie paints realistic, eerie paintings, many of which contain real strong perspectives. Photographer James Welling and painter Peter Dogg have found inspiration from Wyeth's work. Cartoonist Charles M. Schulz referenced some Wyeth scenes in his Peanuts comics, while iconic Christina's Rule remains a mainstay in popular culture and cinema. A 2007 episode of The Simpsons displayed the iconic field, and more recently, artist Tim O'Brien, painted Kelly Conway checking her phone with the White House in the distance. Artists today think of everything they do as a work of art. It's important to forget about what you're doing, then a work of art may happen. The Farnsworth Museum is in Maine and is a wonderful museum that's on my bucket list one of these days to visit, where you can see countless numbers of his work. This is the Brandywine Museum that is on I guess it's the Brandywine River. It is a beautiful museum, and not only does it house, it is a conservatory, but it also houses works from the entire family. Plus, it does exhibits that complement the environment. It was an old grist mill that Betsy went to an investor and said, "Hey, turn this grist mill into a museum," which she did. And you can see it's 3 stories of glass. It's absolutely beautiful. So I leave you with this. This is the painting that I love so much. And this is the one where he was upstairs looking the studio over, raised the window. The wind came in and lifted this battered old lace curtain. And he said, "This is the moment. This is the moment I want to paint." The end.